Imagine you've poured a fresh, steaming cup of tea, and right before you take a sip, a fly drops from the ceiling and lands right in your mug. Your instincts likely give you two immediate options. You either dump the entire drink down the sink, or you carefully scoop the bug out and try to forget it happened. But a 1400-year-old religious text offers a very different instruction. A highly authenticated Islamic Hadith, narrated by Abu Hurairah, states that if a fly falls into your drink, you shouldn't just scoop it out. You should force the insect completely under the surface, immerse it fully, and only then throw it away. The text provides a highly specific biological reason for this. It claims the insect carries a disease in one of its wings and a direct cure, or antidote, in the other. To a modern listener, dipping a disease-carrying insect back into your beverage sounds reckless and unhygienic. The instruction is so counterintuitive that during the 20th century, a number of modern scholars were actually embarrassed by the text and considered discarding it entirely. The question is whether this ancient directive is simply flawed, outdated advice, or if it describes a microscopic reality that our modern sensibilities are too quick to dismiss. To understand why a ruling like this exists, we have to look at the harsh environment where it originated. In 7th century Arabia, food was incredibly scarce. Communities survived on meager rations like dates, and drinking water often had to be hauled by hand from remote desert wells. If a single insect falling into a communal water pot meant the entire supply had to be thrown out, the results would be devastating. Adhering to modern standards of visual purity would have quickly led to mass starvation across the region. To address this, the ruling clarified that insects without flowing blood, such as flies, honeybees, and mosquitoes, or even ants, do not inherently ruin the purity of the food or water they land in. For communities living in dry, insect-heavy environments, this was an essential allowance. It meant they could retain their hard-won resources, consume their food safely, and ultimately stay alive through harsh seasons. This directive solved an immediate sociological problem by preventing unnecessary waste. But that leaves a critical question unresolved. If you actually drank from that pot, was the water biologically safe? We can test that specific safety today. In 1927, the Rockefeller Foundation conducted a study confirming what we now consider obvious. Flies are active carriers of disease-causing bacteria. But to test the specific claims of the ancient Hadith, researchers at King Abdulaziz University in Saudi Arabia recently designed a rigorous set of 4 clinical experiments. This diagram shows a top-down view of the first experiment, the control. When a fly merely falls onto the surface of the liquid without sinking, rapid bacterial growth begins immediately, spreading outward into the drink. In the second test, the fly was forced below the surface for a single dip. The researchers observed that the initial burst of bacteria was halted entirely. Whatever bacteria had already formed remained, but no new colonies were produced. The results of the third and fourth tests reveal that when the fly is submerged multiple times, the action actively neutralizes the remaining pathogens and disease-spreading germs. This occurs because total immersion triggers the release of specific antimicrobial agents and fungi that live on the fly's body, which act as a direct biological counter to the bacteria. Because these internal antidotes are only released through full contact with the liquid, modern microbiology aligns with the ancient text. The fly introduces the threat, but also the specific biological mechanism required to neutralize it. The scholars of 7th century Arabia had no microscopes and no concept of microbiology. They had no way of observing the mechanics of pathogen neutralization. Instead, they relied on a classical Islamic science known as Mushkil al-Hadith. This was a dedicated method used to decode difficult, confusing, or seemingly contradictory texts to uncover their deeper significance. Using this framework, the classical scholar Ibn Hajar interpreted the poison mentioned in the Hadith as a direct representation of human arrogance and the ego. Think about your own reaction to a bug in your cup. The immediate response is usually disgust. But by actively forcing yourself to fully submerge a fly, rather than immediately tossing the drink away in revulsion, you participate in a philosophical exercise to drown your own ego. It builds humility by forcing us to acknowledge that in the context of global scarcity, perfectly safe food is a vital resource that shouldn't be wasted over a moment of personal discomfort. When an ancient text offends our sensibilities, the instinct is often to reject it entirely. But historical wisdom regularly carries layers of profound psychological and physical truth, and sometimes science simply needs a few centuries to build the tools to catch up.